Hi, and welcome back to Actions, the Responses to Trafficking podcast. I'm Kathryn Baldacchino, and this is a podcast where I speak to people who are working in different ways to respond to trafficking in order to help share their work with other people also working in the field. Today's discussion is with Olivia Nightingale from Hope for Justice. Olivia's been working as an independent modern slavery advocate and has been working to develop the model more widely. She offers loads of insight to what the model looks like and the key learning the advocates are making. We spoke in October 2020. Thanks for watching this episode, and get in touch with any feedback or further questions via @ActionsPodcast on Twitter. Please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel, and you can find the audio version of these recordings wherever you download your podcasts. So today I'm speaking with Olivia Nightingale, who is an independent modern slavery advocate at Hope for Justice, and also the focal point looking at the development of the IMSA model and its wider rollout. Hello, Olivia. Thanks for making the time for this discussion today. Hello. Very good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Really
excited to talk to you.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really looking forward to talking about the IMSA model and this new this program that you're working on. And we will definitely be discussing the IMSA, the advocates, in just a moment. So aside from your role, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
A little bit about myself, the golden question where everyone freezes and says, what's interesting about me? In terms of kind of how I came to Hope for Justice, I have a legal background, so I studied law at the University of Nottingham, sadly before the Rights Lab existed, otherwise I probably would have made every excuse to be involved with them and be supporting the work they're doing. But following sort of graduating, I was kind of looking into whether I wanted to explore a career in law as a barrister or solicitor. I still wasn't sure if out of those two kind of professions, and therefore took up kind of various different sort of legal opportunities and trying to gain experience that kind of range from some work with sort of citizen advice and paralegal work. I was a research assistant for a while with the University of Nottingham in international human rights law, which again I really, really loved. But as kind of I did more of this experience and was thinking more about what I wanted to get into, I was very aware that I really enjoyed working with people very holistically and seeing various different areas of their world work together to help, achieve outcomes. And while I'm very passionate about the law, and I'm sure that will shine through today, I also kind of didn't want to personally go straight into a role where I was looking really specifically at one area like immigration or social welfare or kind of public law, and not then have the ability to work with clients and now survivors in more of a kind of holistic capacity. So that's when I first actually came into contact with the issue, I guess, of human trafficking, volunteering for a charity working with sex workers. I had training actually from Hope for Justice about sort of spotting the signs. And I then came across a legal internship that Hope for Justice were running at the time and applied to that. And then that was in 2017. So I've now been with Hope for Justice for 3 years and transitioned from a legal intern into my role as an independent modern slavery advocate and IMSA, which we'll go on to after. So that's kind of a bit about my kind of how I came to my role. Outside of work, I love being outside, lover of nature, care a lot about the environment. My husband and I have an allotment where we grow a lot of weeds and the occasional vegetable. We're not currently doing so well, but we've had produce. It's fun. So yeah, I love being outside. I love being connected to nature. And definitely kind of how I unwind. And yeah, I don't know if there's much more to say. Well, there probably is, but not for this introduction.
That is brilliant and great to know about the allotment as well. So if anyone's in need of veggies,
yeah. Come to me, no problem. Oh dear, yeah, I do enjoy it.
That's great. And about your role and about working for Hope for Justice, what is it that motivates you about the field and about your job in particular?
Oh, good question. I am definitely very motivated by seeing survivors empowered to make their own decisions. And I think that's kind of what really drew me to Hope for Justice, and in particular their advocacy team, was I saw a team that facilitated kind of that empowerment and that ability to make informed choices that survivors have when certain barriers are dealt with, worked on, overcome, and that really motivates me. Like working with my clients, are some of the most inspiring people I know, and their kind of ability to put up with a lot of challenges, not only obviously in their history, but then also sort of after they've sort of left exploitation. It's really inspiring to see kind of their resilience, and to have a small part to play in working alongside them is such a privilege. So that's probably my main driver.
Fantastic. Yeah, definitely a reason to come into work every day.
Absolutely.
And with regards to Hope for Justice, how would you describe or introduce Hope for Justice to people who are completely new to the organisation?
Yes. So Hope for Justice is an international anti-slavery organisation. We have a vision to live in a world free from slavery. We currently work in over like 30 locations, I believe, across kind of 5 continents. And we approach, I guess, the issues of modern slavery and human trafficking very differently in the context with which we're working. So our programs, I guess, in other countries will look quite different to our programs in the UK. But in the UK, we kind of have 4 key strands to our programming, which is training. So we look at identifying, training people to identify the sort of signs and indicators of human trafficking that I sort of attended, way back when I was working with kind of sex workers. And they also do some training on kind of how to be a first responder and their duties, and doing that well. We have hubs that look at identifying potential victims, making sure they make informed choices about whether they do or don't want to enter the NRM, that they're kind of safeguarded in the meantime. And we have an advocacy team, which is the independent modern slavery advocates, and our IMSA model, which we'll obviously go on to. And all of those kind of 3 strands we then feed into our like reform agenda. So we look at kind of taking that frontline experience to to the Home Office, to the sector, to say these are the things that we would like to see change. These are the challenges we're facing. These are the opportunities we see for improvement, and actually see sort of legislative and policy changes that then have a wider impact on survivors beyond those that we sort of more particularly work with. And Hope for Justice actually also has a kind of a business arm called Slavery Alliance that works with businesses to identify and ultimately to prevent modern slavery and human trafficking in their supply chains. And it actually operates as a social enterprise, so all the profits then come back into the programme of Hope for Justice. So when businesses are kind of involved in that, they not only get the sort of support looking at their supply chains, but also the money that comes through from that supports our programme. So it's really kind of a great initiative. But yeah, that's kind of us kind of globally and mainly in the UK.
Excellent. And it's really interesting that you've got also the international side of your work too. So I presume that's a really unique opportunity to inform practice across borders as well. And so international work probably informs your UK practice and vice versa.
Absolutely. And I think we find that a lot more than others actually often imagine. I think we sometimes can have quite a kind of a view that often things that we learn in the UK or in the US, for example, we must kind of take to other countries. And we found like so often it's the opposite that's true, that some of the learnings that we have from kind of our work in Ethiopia, in Cambodia, in Uganda have really like informed and enriched the kind of practice kind of here in the UK and in Norway and the US and in other countries where we operate very different programs, but a lot of the so kind of in some of our countries like Ethiopia and Cambodia and Uganda, we work with children, whereas in the UK we work with adults. So there are some kind of key differences, but actually there is so much crossover and learning, as you say, kind of going back and forth between those different countries, and it really does enrich our kind of I guess our programs and our expertise.
And where in the UK are you based? Where do you work from, and what coverage do you have of the UK?
Yeah, it's a good question. So our head office is Manchester. So we're one of the sort of northern charities, I guess. But we do kind of operate more kind of around the UK. And that's kind of true for all of our programs in the UK. But I think for advocacy in particular, while our head office is in Manchester and our independent advocates work out of our Manchester office, or out of our homes as we now are in this strange time, we do work with clients kind of largely in the Midlands and the North, and that's you know, if we did have a client that was in London, we often feel that to try and find support in London tends to be better, because London is a whole kind of world of its own in terms of some of the advocacy required to obtain get good results for clients. So yeah, predominantly in the kind of Midlands and the north of England is where we operate our kind of advocacy team. So we do work remotely, obviously meeting with clients when we can, but yeah, can kind of follow clients where they go as well. I know we might come to when we talk about our model, but there's definitely a benefit in that. But if our client suddenly has to uproot and move for any reason, if they're dispersed, if they're moved to a different safe house, we're able to still maintain that kind of continuity of kind of relationship and support. So that's a real advantage as well of being, you know, working with clients around the country.
Yeah, for sure. And just to help people place the organisation in relation to the rest of the sector, so Hope for Justice isn't a victim care contract provider, is not part of the NRM, and is not a first responder, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So we sit outside of government provision across all our programmes, and that has kind of benefits for us, particularly in the role of independent modern slavery advocates, quite important for the independence piece. And it also gives us quite a unique position with which to kind of support the sector and support what's happening within the sector objectively, and you know, using the voices of our clients and what survivors are saying about the support to kind of really help to enhance and improve you know, operations of support and the support provided by the VCC and other government provisions. So we're kind of, I guess it is a privilege to be in that position to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's for sure. So this seems like the right time to start talking more about the independent modern slavery advocates and that role specifically in relation to the sector and how that interacts. So can you summarize what an IMSA is?
Yes, an IMSA is essentially a single point of contact and trust for a survivor of trafficking in the UK, adult survivors of trafficking in the UK who find themselves navigating very kind of complex systems of support, facing multiple barriers to accessing that support for various different reasons. And a kind of the job and the role of an IMSA is to have a kind of in-depth and holistic knowledge of those areas of support in order to kind of advocate for, you know, these barriers to be overcome and for clients to be able to achieve the outcomes that they, you know, want and achieve their kind of goals without the, you know, these barriers that are so often very unnecessary kind of getting in the way. So we kind of traditionally have either a legal or a social work background. And in the kind of development of the model, we actually merged two teams. We had a separate kind of legal caseworker role and a survivor support caseworker role. And we actually, from feedback from clients saying, actually, I just want one person that understands both things, we actually merged those two teams and kind of created the role of the independent modern slavery advocate. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell. But obviously there's kind of a lot of facets to it. But we, yeah, as we've kind of touched on, we sit outside of government provision. We work in accordance with the advocacy charter and the survivor care standards, as well as kind of trauma-informed approaches, and those things are very important to us. So and kind of create the foundation of what an IMSA is.
So are all your IMSAs legally trained as well as sort of support caseworker trained as well, or are there different individuals in different roles?
Yes, so when we had the kind of split, legal caseworkers would have a legal background and survivor support caseworkers tended to have a social work background, and now we've merged those two. So for an IMSA, we would kind of say we'd ideally like people with either a legal or a social work background or kind of equivalent experience in those areas. And then depending on the individual themselves, the kind of, I guess, the training, obviously the training is consistent across all IMSAs, but the training will bring those with a social work experience up to the level required for the legal advocacy, and those with the legal experience up to the knowledge, you know, required for you know, the soft skills, reflective practice, working with clients in a you know, trauma-informed way, things that are more traditionally kind of social work focused. So we kind of, desire to bring those two together really in the role of an IMSA, but the team definitely internally supports one another with that, and we each have kind of individual specialisms that we will draw on for our casework and support one another in that.
And how long has the role been, how long have you been working on this role, and how long has IMSA existed within Hope for Justice?
Yeah, so it was back in, I think we created the role of IMSA around sort of 2016, early to 2017, and our now Director of Legal Policy, Philippa Roberts, she wrote a briefing paper on the role of an independent modern slavery advocate. She shared that with the sector at the time. It's still available, so people are interested in seeing that, they can. Be happy to share that. And that really kind of explored looking at the roles of independent domestic violence advocates, independent sexual violence advocates, learning from those models, saying how, you know, recognizing there is a need for that kind of role in our sector, perhaps even, I'd say even more so with some of the clients that we're working with the complexities around immigration that are present, and the kind of the extra support available to survivors of human trafficking adds another kind of layer of complexities and places where people can fall through gaps. So I think there was definitely an, you know, identification that it was independent advocacy that was needed. So the IMSA role was kind of created in more formally, I guess, in 2017, and we've been ever since then kind of just really putting the model into practice, I guess, and refining it and developing it as we go, and taking our learnings from feedback from survivors, from things we found do and don't work, in order to kind of get to the point where we're now, as you kind of mentioned in the introduction, looking at the kind of development of the model. How do we take it beyond, you know, the team of sort of 8 IMSAs that we have in our Manchester office, and see kind of more survivors able to access you know, independent advocacy of this kind of kind.
Who is eligible for support? So how can people become eligible and be part of this program?
Good question. So we sort of operate a very open referral criteria, which I think is quite important for independent advocacy. So it's not dependent on having recourse to public funds. I mean, one of the main things we do is support clients to ensure they get the right advice to ensure they have that recourse. It's kind of not tied to any kind of NRM status, so we will work with kind of clients wherever they are, if independent advocacy is something they want and need. In terms of accessing that support, more historically, our clients were predominantly those that our hubs had identified, and we were kind of felt, you know, we did really feel this commitment of we've identified these potential victims. They've often gone into the NRM, and then they were often finding themselves in quite difficult situations, and sometimes ending up kind of destitute and homeless. And we recognise the need for kind of longer term advocacy and support. So we really wanted to support, you know, a lot of our referrals came kind of internally from our hubs. More recently, we've kind of have opened up to more external referrals, and now we've actually even more recently sort of developed 2, because we are only a team of 8 IMSAs and there's only so many full cases, I guess, we can run. We've created 2 complementary strands to our IMSA model, which are advice and intervention only. So we really do welcome advice from the sector. I think, you know, hopefully quite a few are aware of that, and I can share the details of how people can access that support. And that's for survivors and for those in, you know, professionals in the sector. And we will also kind of offer a kind of an intervention only service where, and this is usually kind of where a client has, you know, appropriate support and quite, you know, like coherent support in place, but there is the need for the expertise of the advocacy team in one really specific area. So we've sometimes, you know, written grounds for a mandatory reconsideration of a welfare benefit decision, or we've done sort of pre-NRM advocacy and ensured that a potential victim can access the appropriate support of the VCC. So there are various different ways in which that would support a client in a very specific area, but actually full advocacy isn't needed or not wanted in the case. So that's really enabled us to support more survivors and also really support the sector and kind of share some of the expertise and knowledge that we've kind of gained over the years. So we really do, welcome people using that. And then if, I guess that's kind of how then referrals can be made, if when that advice is given, if we recognise this is definitely a case that would warrant, you know, a full kind of advocacy package of support, and the client wants that support, then we will, if capacity allows, then take it on as a full case.
Excellent. It's really great to know actually that the sector can also tap into your expertise too, through the advice line, through the intervention only program, which means that you're supporting survivors, but also supporting others who are supporting survivors with their knowledge and capacity building as well, or checking certain things with you.
Yes, and actually the more people are using that kind of advice service, the better it becomes, because the more you hear of other things available, those that are calling you say that we have this available, like great, and then that helps the next kind of caller. So I think it is, definitely we want it to be a resource for the sector, as well as for survivors kind of with complex cases that don't really know where to go.
Yeah. Something else I've heard you mention before is that the support is available for as long as people need it. So there's no kind of, time frame, and you're really with people on the journey to their own kind of place of recovery or well-being. From your experience, what stage do you find is the most ideal time to have an IMSA get involved? Because you've really, clearly highlighted the complexity of people's situations and the amount of different organizations that somehow suddenly get involved in somebody's situation, and how confusing that can be. Is there a particular kind of golden moment or a really, perfect opportunity where IMSA could best be deployed for an individual?
That is a really, really interesting question. I guess from experience and from our caseload, I would say that the earlier the better. And I would say that because so much of our advocacy work is to kind of, I guess, prevent homelessness, ensure that people have their rights and entitlements. And if you get to a certain point where those have already been, human rights have already been breached, someone has already spent time on the streets, that's kind of, it's not necessarily like harder, it's just that survivor has been through that situation now of having experienced destitution and homelessness after having been identified. So I think in that sense, the earlier the better, but that means that there's kind of a bit of like a, I don't know, like lulls, I guess, in the period of intense support. So I say, if we initially kind of got involved when someone was sort of first identified, and they were looking at whether they wanted to go into the NRM, and we gave pre-NRM advocacy, so they really wanted to access the support of the VCC, but for some reason were having some challenges there, we would support them into that. And then if they were living in a safe house, it might be that we kind of are less involved. We work in partnership with the support worker in the safe house to see what support needs are likely to go beyond their time in the safe house, things like immigration, compensation, cooperation with the police, and we will kind of, I guess, take more of the lead on those things, and the support worker takes more of the lead on the other things, so that when then that client transitions out of the NRM, we already have the established relationship with the client. We've worked well with the support worker or outreach worker in the NRM to ensure that that's a smooth transition, and we're not picking it up later at a point when sort of, I guess, crisis has happened. So in that sense, the earlier the better, but there are definitely times when more intense advocacy is required, and I would say that is at key transition phases. So when they're identified, when they're exploring their future options, when they're exited out of the NRM, when they've just had a significant decision on I don't know, either their kind of CG or overturning of a decision, or they're about to engage with the criminal justice system. There are key points where maybe the advocacy intensifies, and there are times where it kind of is more light touch. But the commitment to working with survivors long term is a real privilege, and one that I don't think we take lightly. I think we are so grateful, and I'm very grateful to Hope for Justice for allowing us to work with people longer term, and we are very we take very seriously the importance of the independence of a survivor. So I guess what I'm saying is we definitely don't want to encourage dependence on the IMSA, but the whole role of an IMSA is to ensure that a survivor is making informed choices. And actually the time that we're involved is usually because of the extensive time that certain processes take, like the criminal justice process, like civil compensation processes can take years. So ensuring that the kind of client has that support and can tap into their kind of IMSA and that expertise throughout those processes, we've seen just has had a huge impact on survivors, and that's what they've kind of fed back to us. So it is something that we do see as quite important.
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely coming through in the case studies and in all the reports about excuse me, the success of the IMSA model so far. You've touched on some interesting points there about engagement with the criminal justice system,
yes.
And informed consent, and really enabling people to make their own choices. I'm really keen to hear from you, because I think your expertise on this would be really insightful in the practical application of how you strike the balance between your independence and your principle of really fully informed consent, and enabling people to make their own choices, but balancing that against kind of a deliverable about wanting possibly to see more people engage with criminal justice and prosecution. And I know it's one of the outcomes that you measure, that actually people are more engaged with criminal justice because of IMSAs. How do you strike the balance between really trying to have people make their own choices, but equally wanting people to engage with criminal justice?
That is a very good question. And I think my response to it would be that by solely focusing on the first, the latter happens. And I think that's what we've kind of experienced, is that actually when survivor care is a priority, when survivors are given informed choices, when they're not destitute and homeless, when they have kind of stable housing, they have sort of stable income, they themselves then come to a point where they are ready to engage with the criminal justice system. Now, it's very important to say there will be some survivors that never will, and we respect that, and we would never put pressure on survivors to engage with the police. But I think what we found, by almost like the engagement with the police was more an outcome of the advocacy that we then identified and said, hey, this is something that this role helps towards, rather than us saying, oh, we want to do this, so does this work for it? It was kind of like chicken before the egg. It was cart before the horse, chicken before the egg. That's not the right analogy, you know what I mean. Cart before the horse, if you actually put the horse, okay, maybe they do, but yeah, if you really prioritize in ensuring that survivors are empowered to make their own choices, and they are supported to access basic human rights, their kind of ability to engage in those systems is suddenly opened up. And we have found, kind of from experience, that so many clients that were terrified of engaging with the police initially did open up to the idea, and actually came to us saying, I would like to report to the police. And that was because they were in, their mental health was much more stable, or they weren't terrified of being deported. All these, there are so many barriers initially when someone is first identified to cooperating with the police. And I think we also really pride ourselves on working well with the police to kind of enhance that engagement, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions amongst the sort of survivor communities of engagement with the police, a lot that have come from very true and real experiences. And I know there's a lot of learning, and that there's much more kind of good practice out there. I think a lot more police forces are now much more keenly aware of the issues of modern slavery and human trafficking, how to spot it. But when a client has had an experience of police coming in and arresting them rather than identifying them, they're very naturally going to be closed off to that. But I think as you really prioritize ensuring that someone has their basic needs, and also is listened to and empowered, their decision to engage with the criminal justice system becomes their own decision, and often does lead to them wanting to do that, is what we've found.
Great. So it's really about not necessarily going in and focusing on it, but actually by channeling all attention and energy on proper survivor support, one of the outcomes turns out to be that people are more cooperative with criminal justice.
Exactly that. Yeah. And of course there's work that goes into encouraging and enhancing that relationship, demystifying some of what it looks like to engage with the criminal justice system. We support people as witnesses in trials. 100% of the clients that we've worked with that have been called as witnesses have been able to attend trial. So again, when they are then actively engaging with the criminal justice system, the role of an IMSA and independent advocacy actually then helps them to continue that kind of engagement. So it is kind of both sides. But yes, as you say, if you focus on the one, the other is kind of a natural byproduct often. So.
And in terms of the work of the IMSAs and the things that they're engaging with and the types of issues they're seeing, what are some of the key issues or challenges that they're asked to deal with, or they need to deal with as part of their support to survivors?
Yeah, there are many challenges and issues, I guess, that clients face, and I think that we only exist because there are challenges and issues. In that sense, independent advocacy is there to help overcome those. I think if I had to try and think of the key ones, I'd probably lump them under kind of headings, in the sense that some of the challenges, or some of the key challenges faced, are as a result of a lack of support on one side, or failures or fractures in those support systems, or kind of falling through the gap of those systems. So it's kind of either there is kind of a lack. So I guess an example of that is where we have clients who have relatively complex needs. Perhaps they've been evicted from a safe house for antisocial behaviour linked to substance misuse and mental health. The lack of dual diagnosis teams across all the country that work with people with both mental health and alcohol substance misuses cause an issue for those clients to really move on and to address those two challenges. And also the lack of kind of specialist support and appropriate accommodation for some of these clients. For example, single unit accommodation within the NRM is something that we commonly kind of advocate for, and we sort of raise to the Home Office, saying that some clients will not be able to recover in a shared house. Like, that is, you know, we have time and time again seen clients that have been evicted because of behaviour, often rightfully so. You know, the reasons for eviction are legitimate. You have to safeguard other survivors in the safe house. But then when we've advocated for that client to secure single unit accommodation, their own space, we've linked them in with a dual diagnosis team, for example, suddenly their behaviour changes. They're able to engage with the services, and we've seen, you know, quite significant transformations in those cases. So I think there is some sense in which the lack of, I guess the lack in every area of some of those services presents a real challenge. But then where the systems do exist, they're often providing amazing support to survivors, and we couldn't do our job without those systems existing. You know, we need, like local authority to provide housing, we need DWP to provide benefits, we need the NRM to provide specialist support and safe housing and outreach work. But I guess where some of the challenges lie there is where those systems don't work in the way that we should. I mean, just the other week became involved in with a couple, and we're working with them in an advocacy capacity, and our IMSA recognised that there was a challenge, that the clients were entitled to employment and support allowance, and that they had been entitled for the last 3 years. So alongside advocacy, went to the kind of front loading the advocacy, doing mandatory reconsiderations, getting it to appeal stage, working alongside the Air Centre. We got that decision overturned, and a £24,000 back pay for the money that was owed to them. So I think it's some of our challenges is that the kind of support that should be available to clients is so hard to access. And I mean, if you take kind of compensation, for example, it's an ECAT right for clients, for survivors to access compensation. One of the ways that they can access it is through the CICA scheme, Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority scheme. However, when you apply as a victim of trafficking, you're often told, it's not actually a crime of violence, so you can't have compensation, or you didn't cooperate with the police, you know, even though your trafficker told you that they kill your family if you cooperated with the police. You can't have compensation. Or you have previous criminal convictions, no, you also can't have compensation. So there are multiple challenges in each individual area, and of course those advocacy is kind of committed to the amount of times I've had to have conversations with clients and tell them, your application has been refused on the fact that they don't believe you suffered a crime of violence. Like, that is a horrible conversation to have. And I've had clients shouting. I'm like, I'd be shouting if I was, hearing that news. I completely agree with you, but we're kind of committed to making the application, knowing it will get refused, to then sort of refer it to a solicitor that's looking at kind of changing, and trying to bring challenges to the whole system so that it's changed for all survivors. So I think that's kind of the second umbrella, I guess, where systems aren't necessarily working or allowing clients to access the support that they deserve, or even that presenting someone as homeless can require kind of extensive advocacy just to get someone a house. I mean, we're talking about a very basic human right to have shelter and to have housing, and status. I mean, if we sort of, I don't know, gave survivors the dignity of stable status and stable housing, what that would do to open up opportunities for them is kind of painful to think of, because it's just such simple things that are so difficult for clients to access in our systems, in our context. So I think that would be how I would describe a lot of the challenges are like, it is simple things like housing, like income, you know, like compensation for what they've been through, but there are so many barriers that they face in each of those areas that makes that all the more challenging. And then I think the last thing I said was where, yeah, falling through the gaps of systems. I know I mentioned that when I sort of said about mental health and you know, alcohol support. That's another way in which people will fall through the gaps. But we see too often survivors falling through the gaps of systems such as the asylum system, local authority, the NRM, where all systems say, I don't actually have a duty because this other system has a duty, and then that system says we don't have the duty because the other person has the duty. And I think it's really challenging, and I think we will continue to advocate, and especially in our reform agenda, for clarity to be given to where responsibility lies. So, you know, one of those key example of that is pre-NRM. Who has the duty to provide kind of accommodation and support and safeguarding to a potential victim in that space? It's still unknown, and it means we're leaving people in very vulnerable situations where they're falling between the gaps of these services, unable to access the service they want because they're being told they have access to another service that's also told them that they can't access that service. So I think kind of advocacy tries to obviously bring about individual results and outcomes for those individual cases, but also takes this learning, saying where is the lack, you know, what is needed in terms of systems, where are systems failing, and also where are people falling through the gaps, and let's try and use this knowledge and expertise to make those kind of changes at a kind of policy level, which I know there's amazing work in the policy field campaigning for all these, you know, all these same things. But yeah, I say they were our kind of three key challenges that we face.
Excellent. Really, really clear. And I always really hesitant about asking that question, because especially for people like yourself that work so intensively in the sector, because actually there are a lot of shortcomings and there are a lot of things that obviously still require us to continue working in this way.
Yeah.
So as a way of a bit of a flip side to that,
yes,
users are so involved and are seeing so much practice across the sector and engaged with so many different organizations, and really that sort of common thread for people. Are there any good practices that you're starting to see that you definitely want to be promoting or encouraging other people to start thinking about?
Oh gosh, absolutely. And that's such an important follow-up question, because I think we can sometimes all get, you know, all of those that work in this sector can become very bogged down with some of the challenges that we face, because we are facing it every day. And so we, you know, we see survivors having to battle with these things. But there absolutely are some fantastic, you know, examples of good practice. Well, I guess that I would highlight, I'm, you know, hugely have welcomed some of the initiatives coming into the pre-NRM space. You know, I was mentioning how often sort of people are left in this limbo. It's not really sure kind of who has a duty to provide that accommodation, and obviously accommodation is so necessary, you know, even to have a stable setting with which someone can make informed decisions about the NRM. So, you know, like your space at British Red Cross in kind of East Midlands, providing accommodation and sort of advice and advocacy to ensure that someone has the space to make that decision. Equally, the Safe Places project run by the West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network, again, fantastic initiative, meaning that people can have that moment of just, okay, I'm supported, I have a roof over my head, I'm going to think about what's next. So we hugely welcome kind of those initiatives.
And we also spoke to Amber a few weeks ago about her, about that program. So that's another one of our podcasts.
Oh, brilliant!
On the West Midlands Safe Space program.
So good, yes. And we have utilised both of those kind of programs for clients that we're engaging with, and it genuinely makes such a difference. So those things are fantastic. I think more recently with our with Operation Fort, it was a large kind of operation. Bringing kind of to justice a kind of large criminal gang of traffickers in the UK that trafficked Polish nationals, and we were kind of Hope for Justice heavily involved in that case, having identified and then a lot of the some of the first and then a lot of the survivors, and then working with them longer term. That was really a good example of good practice within the police. They engaged so well with the survivors. They had a kind of dedicated victim liaison officer that built that rapport with clients. They understood the issues of DLR. They understood how to apply for DLR, why it was important, which is discretionary leave to remain, that is available to survivors for various different reasons, one of them being when they're engaging with the police. And that seeing the experience of survivors through Operation 4, we could highlight a lot of good practice. Even when it went to court, Caroline Hawley, the QC working on the case, was so empowering and supportive of the witnesses, and really kind of saying it's only because of you that we're doing this. And that had, you know, it had such an incredible impact on the witnesses. So right the way from identification through to the successful outcome in court, you know, there was good practice the whole way through. I would also highly commend the launch of the training standards that's just recently been launched, that's kind of been done by Skills and Care, led by St Mary's and Snowdrop, an amazing initiative of bringing together the sector to create kind of standards of training required for people working in this area. And I think those will go such a huge way to kind of providing a consistency of training and knowledge within both the sector, but also wider, those that come in contact with clients, that will help to, I do think, you know, obviously we have to see the outcomes of that, and we're looking forward to the learnings from that. But my goodness, it's going to go a long way to ensuring that there's a level of training and expertise within the sector that can support survivors in several ways. So yeah, there are, we also, I guess, have quite individual kind of quite local authority specific examples of good practice. We have areas where they have a really fantastic no recourse team that have a high level of knowledge and expertise on trafficking and their duties and their kind of international and domestic duties to survivors of trafficking, and also just to ensuring they prevent breaches of human rights. That makes a massive difference when we're kind of supporting clients that are in that kind of situation. But I guess a lot of them are kind of pocketed, and obviously we're hoping that a lot of that good practice will be shared and learned so that it has a kind of wider impact. But yeah, there is a lot of good practice out there, and I mean, our role is only possible through kind of partnership with support services and other things. There are supported employment projects, Bright Future, Jericho Foundation, these kind of organizations working to kind of enhance the options available to survivors to move forward. There is definitely a lot of good practice that we make full use of as IMSAs whenever they rise. So yeah, those are just a few. But
good.
Yeah,
great
absolutely.
to hear that there's a lot of good practice that we could be drawing from as well, and a really important precedent being set across the sector too, in all different aspects and fields. Great.
Yes.
So we've unfortunately run out of time, Olivia.
Oh.
It's been so interesting though, a really great conversation.
Great.
Thanks so much for making the time to speak to me.
Such a pleasure.
If anyone would like to find out,
it's been great. Thank you for all.
Yeah, no,
sorry,
absolutely.
I think
there's been a delay on the
I froze.
Zoom.
Yeah,
that's fine. If anyone would like to find out more information or get in touch with you, what should they do?
Absolutely. You can contact, if you kind of want to know more about, I guess, the IMSA model. We will be sharing more information on that in the report quite shortly, so hopefully that will be available. But you can contact me at olivia.nightingale@hopeforjustice.org if you want to hear more specifically around the IMSA model. If anyone does want to reach out for advice, our advice email address is advocacy.advice@hopeforjustice.org, and it's our mainline number that can also get through to our advocacy team. So again, I can share those with you and they can be shared with those. But for listeners, yeah, if they want to kind of get in touch via any of those means, we would welcome speaking to them and hearing from them.
Perfect. And I'll put all of those details in the show notes, and some of the documents that you mentioned as well. We can include links to that as well, so that people can access those. Awesome. Thank you. So that just leaves me to say thank you again to Olivia. I really look forward to hearing more about the evolution and the development of the IMSA model.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Kat, for having me and for asking such pertinent questions. It's really good.
Great.
Really exciting.
Really good to have you. And thank you also to the listeners for tuning in. Until the next one, goodbye.
You've been listening to Actions, Responses to Trafficking podcast. Music used in this episode is Inspiration, written by Rayful Crux and sourced from freepd.com. Actions is produced and presented by Kathryn Baldacchino.